There are a lot of studies about like the sort of effectiveness of employee-owned companies in relation to other companies in the same space. And what a lot of those show, and since the 80s, this has been the case, basically there's no difference in the competitiveness between a company that's employee-owned versus a sort of traditional company, unless that company has a culture of ownership. And many employee-owned companies invest heavily in a culture of ownership. And what does this mean in practice? So I'll give an example. So there's a company in North Alabama called Alitrade. Alitrade has over 1,000 workers. It is a chicken plant. They do deboning for chicken. And they've been employee owned for 4 or 5 years. Since they became employee owned, they instituted a program where they do morning huddles. And they have like an employee ideas program. And essentially what they do is they teach the workers. They actually, I interviewed, we did a short documentary about it. They actually have a literal classroom in the chicken plant where every worker goes and receives training in financial literacy and business literacy. They understand how their work every day on the line connects to the bottom line of the company, and they're literally invested in it. So they actually gain the value that they're producing in their work. And so armed with that knowledge, then they have these huddles where they will literally ask the employees like every day. And because the workforce is incredibly diverse, they do these huddles in Spanish, English, and Creole. And they'll ask the workers, here's where we hit on our metrics for this week. What do you think is going on here? And so they were having a period where they were struggling. And there was one woman who was on the line who raised her hand and said, my knife gets dull every day at 1 p.m. And suddenly all these other people were like, my knife also gets dull at 1 p.m. And the management listened. They actually listened and they said, okay, well then let's do 3 knife changes instead of 2. Their yield increased by almost half. And the last I heard, they were having a year of record profits and doing really, really well. And this is just a very small example of like what happens when employees are listened to. And you can imagine how that flows into every single other part of their life, right? Suddenly they, if you're getting financial literacy training for the business, you're also using that in your own life. You're also teaching that to your children. And most importantly, after, 10, 20 years, the really exciting thing is that like these workers, after like 5 years of employee ownership, each have over $10,000 at the minimum, basically, in their ownership accounts. And many employee-owned companies will pay out workers when they retire. Workers will retire at like 50 with hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so you have to ask yourself, like, what happens when an entire cohort of employees who have business training, right, who are trusted to fix problems on the job, then retire at 50 with like hundreds of thousands of dollars? Like, those are new entrepreneurs. And so I think what people don't understand is that employee ownership is doing what a lot of other institutions that we've built also do, which is it is giving workers apprenticeship training. It often is a place where they Alitrade promotes from within whenever they can. Really high rates. You see extraordinary retention in an industry like the poultry industry, which is for many people like almost seasonal labor. People will work for a few months to pay off their bills and then leave. Alitrade will see people stay for years and years, and then get promoted. And then it also becomes this kind of business school and like business incubator as workers get ideas and then either do spinoffs from within the company, which is also a common thing that happens in employee-owned companies where they get like the 40 divisions or something, or they'll just retire and start a new business. And so I'll just end with one last point, which is in Birmingham. I was speaking to this business owner in North Birmingham who built his business. It's a small business, 10 employees, built it from basically nothing over the last 20 or 30 years. And I asked him like how he got started, and he said, well, I was working at a SIPCO, which is Birmingham, like legendary institution, American Cast Iron Pipe Company. And he said, I worked for a SIPCO for around 15 years, and they paid for me to go to school. They gave me management training. Like they taught me all the skills. And then I really wanted to use that culture in my business. And now he's considering transitioning his own business to employee ownership. But the final piece here is a SIPCO was an employee-owned company. And Esapio was one of the most famous employee-owned companies starting in the 1920s, and they built this culture of profit sharing and employee ownership and employee voice, even up to the point of having like an internal Congress within the company in the 1920s, which even had representation for Black workers at the time, which extended all the way through the 2000s. And now that legacy of employee ownership and investing in your employees now gave birth to a new business, which is then again, hopefully becoming employee owned. So this sort of all fits together. Employee owned businesses are kind of like almost like like sunken ships or Great Barrier Reefs that like sort of within them contain the seeds for a larger ecosystem.